For most people, calcium oxalate stones are a bit of a mystery. However, when you tear away all the complexities, the reason behind why they form is actually pretty simple and cannot happen without something called urine supersaturation. In today's video, we'll get to the bottom of urine supersaturation and teach you a few things you can do to reduce your risk for kidney stones. Hi, I'm Joey Weichman, and welcome to Stone Relief. In today's video, we're going to talk about urine supersaturation, which is the foundation of everything that is when it comes to calcium oxalate kidney stones, which are the most popular or the most common type of kidney stone. So, first thing we want to do is just define what supersaturation is to be able to set the table to help build all these things that are going to go into this type of stone forming. So, supersaturation at a very simple level is this. This is when a particle concentration is greater than a liquid's carrying capacity. In other words, nothing more can be dissolved in this liquid. And the best example that I can think of is like a powdered drink mix. And if you're a millennial like me, or maybe even part of some younger generations, maybe you've used some sort of powdered drink mix at some time. Again, maybe it was Kool-Aid for my generation. There's like springtime lemonade powder packets and like Starbucks Via packets and things like that you're mixing in water. And if you've ever mixed it in water, you've probably at some point in time observed a time when there was some remaining drink mix in the glass. And that remaining drink mix in the glass is supersaturation in action. And there are a couple different situations that lend to that forming. So when you've got excess drink powder in your glass, you've either used too little water, or maybe you've added too much drink mix, which is causing the rest of that drink mix not to be available, and it's floating on top, or it's floating down at the bottom, or maybe it's just cloudy. But this powdered drink mix scenario is exactly what happens inside of our kidneys when we're about to start to crystallize calcium and oxalate to form a kidney stone. So let's walk through this and kind of flip this in the terms of our kidneys instead of a powdered drink situation. So when it comes to our kidneys, and we have urine that's flowing through this, that's being processed from our blood, that's getting into our kidneys, this is what's happening. We have a number of different electrolytes, magnesium, potassium, calcium, and other waste products like oxalate as well, that are ending up in our kidneys. So when we have remaining particles that are not been dissolved by our urine, in essence, the remaining particles, which could be calcium or oxalate in this instance, are our drink mix, and then are in our kidneys, which is our glass, and the liquid solution that we were talking about when we're adding too little water to this drink mix up here is now our urine. And if we have too many of these other miscellaneous elements or waste products like oxalate, this would be indicative of us using too much drink mix or consuming too much oxalate in our diet. So in either situation, these things cannot occur, or a calcium oxalate kidney stone cannot occur unless we have elements that are outside of the liquid's carrying capacity that are free to be able to bind with each other. So in essence, in the drink mix situation, you have extra drink crystals sitting around that might bind together to form bigger clumps. And in our kidneys, we have calcium and oxalate crystals or elements or ions that are floating around in the urine that will clump together to form kidney stones. So, as a whole, supersaturation is the foundation that leads to binding of elements such as calcium and oxalate to form calcium oxalate kidney stones.
Just a reminder, this information is available in written form on our website. Find the link below in the description.
To help further drive this concept of supersaturation home a little bit further, I want to just take a second and go into a little bit more detail about how supersaturation actually relates to the risk for kidney stones. So when supersaturation is present or it starts to increase, this means that we're starting to see higher levels of a variety of different elements. But for our example and purposes today, let's grab some things that are more recognizable. So when supersaturation occurs, and again, we have this leftover drink mix or leftover elements and leftover particles that are floating around in our kidneys or in our urine because they can't be dissolved. we have excess or higher levels of calcium, magnesium, waste products like oxalate, and then also phosphate. Now, when you have these elements that are supersaturated, meaning that they are not being dissolved by the water, and they are free to float around and bind to each other, this is where problems start to occur. So when you have adequate time plus supersaturation, meaning all those free elements ready to bind with each other, your risk increases because, again, you have stone-forming elements that are free, plus they have time in order to bind together, thus increasing your risk for kidney stones. Now, there are some other factors as well that can play into here that are also potential to be supersaturated that will also play into your risk for kidney stones, not to get things too complicated here. But there are inhibitors of kidney stones that are well known. So if you have higher levels of citrate from things like citrus juices and other different types of acidic products, magnesium, or even vitamin B6 found in your urine, and this is something that can be tested by a 24-hour urine test, these elements in particular will also play a role in the binding of these stone-forming materials. So even though you may have supersaturation occurred here and you've got high levels of calcium or high levels of oxalate, if you also have concurrently high levels of citrate or magnesium or vitamin B6, there's also potential for this binding during supersaturation to slow down. But again, in general, in the absence of the inhibitors, the more highly supersaturated your urine is with things like calcium or oxalate or calcium and phosphate, the general higher risk that you are for forming kidney stones. Now, you might be asking yourself, that all sounds great, Joey. I know that now supersaturation is the foundation for all calcium oxalate kidney stones, but what is it that I can actually do about it? So that's what we're going to talk about here in this last section, is actually managing supersaturation. So the first thing that you can do to really and most majorly impact supersaturation is really just to lower your intake of oxalate-containing foods. So the less oxalate that you consume from the foods that you eat, the less they are going to be present in your kidney, and then the less likely they are bind with calcium to form kidney stones. And this is really truly your biggest lever that you can pull, is just eat less oxalate if you are forming calcium oxalate kidney stones and don't have something like primary hyperoxaluria type 1, which means that your body is forming the oxalate on its own. It's not coming from a food source, but that is exceptionally rare. 99% of us out there today are going to be dealing with most of this coming from the foods that we eat. Now, the other half of this is increasing our water intake. So you can still continue to eat oxalate, but if you're flushing out your kidneys on a regular basis through adequate hydration, this will play a role. So the more water you drink, the less concentrated your urine will be, and thus less likely it will be to supersaturate, providing an opportunity for them to bind together. And you'll also be clearing out your kidneys on a more regular basis because you're drinking more water. So any type of oxalate or calcium or phosphate that's existing in your urine is just going to get flushed out the next time that you use the restroom. That's a good thing. And the American Urological Association recommends minimally 3 liters, which is roughly 96 ounces per day, to stay adequately hydrated. And if you do this, this is probably your second biggest lever that you can pull to help you manage supersaturation. Next, the other thing that you can do is increase your level of bioavailable calcium that you take. So the RDA for calcium is currently set at 1,000 milligrams per day. And if you've watched our last video on calcium binding with oxalate, you'll know that the more calcium that you eat, the less oxalate is excreted through your urine. And when it comes to supersaturation, this is a positive thing because calcium is kind of working as a pseudo inhibitor in this instance, where it is not allowing as much oxalate to be excreted through your urine, which lowers the risk of kidney stones because there's just not enough of those stone-forming materials present in the urine. Now, the other big piece to this when it comes to calcium is getting calcium from the appropriate sources. Calcium, for the most part today, is consumed synthetically. So if you're taking a multivitamin or some other type of like health food supplement or protein powder, they've likely added calcium into that. And again, it's going to be in a synthetic form. And unfortunately, our body doesn't really know what to do with synthetic forms of calcium. So more often than not, synthetic forms of calcium, they end up in your kidneys. And guess what happens there? It binds with calcium. Oh, I'm sorry, it binds with oxalate rather, and it forms calcium oxalate kidney stones because your body doesn't know what to do with synthetic calcium, gets kicked over into the kidney, and just because your body doesn't know what to do with it in terms of utilization for other processes, it doesn't mean that it can't bind with oxalate in your kidneys and form kidney stones. Whereas calcium from high quality bioavailable sources like dairies, meats, bones, and cheeses, things that are rich in bioavailable calcium that our body's going to recognize, they get put to work right away for different body processes and very, very rarely end up in your kidneys where they could bind with oxalate and form calcium oxalate kidney stones. If you'd like to join a community of men seeking to avoid surgery and prevent their kidney stones naturally, visit our website. See you in the next video.